Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're joined by Nick Stinemates of System Initiative, who is intrigued and wants to talk about the angle of never rewriting software. Welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to get into it.
So, Nick, as you said in the pre-show, you've been around the block a few times. So I assume you've been involved in a rewrite or 16?
Or 16. Yeah, I think I've been in open source for 25 years or so, and started my career around that time, and I've been writing mobile apps pre iPhone. I don't know. Worked with some large banks. Helped start a little company called Docker. Worked at companies like Rancher and MariaDB, and so like I said, been around the block and seen a few of those things.
Seen a few things. You said something that piqued my interest super early, which is that you've done a lot of open source work.
Yeah.
And do you see, in your time doing open source work, have you seen a lot of rewrites? Because I know open source is notorious for forking.
Well, it's one of the things that's interesting to talk about is is it a rewrite or is it heavy refactor? If you started a project in Python and then it moved to Go, is that a rewrite, or are you taking a core concept and evolving it with different languages, or if you take an existing legacy code base and you break it out into microservices or into disparate services, does that fall under that mantra,
Well, I think it depends how you do it.
Yeah, there you go. So the devil's in the details, right?
Always. Definitely. Yeah, Jeffrey and I have discussed this in a few different ways. Is a front end change we had one episode, is that a rewrite, or is it if we move from local, your servers in the closet, to moving to EC2 in the cloud, is that a rewrite because you've rewritten to cloud architecture? How do we come at this angle different ways? And I think I think Jeffrey has come up with kind of a way to describe what he means by rewrite, this kind of full rewrite concept. So I'll let you get into that, Jeffrey.
Yeah, well, the easier way that I found, or I'm testing out these days to try to explain it, is with a rewrite, there are two systems. And with a heavy refactor, as you say, there's always only one system. And to me, that's the key difference, is whether or not you have a system that you're working on that isn't in production and a system that is in production, or whether there's always just the one system.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So it requires a level of either migration or two systems existing in parallel in order for it to be a rewrite.
In our branded term for it.
Yes, yeah. we make up words in this.
we've said the same thing, because rewrite by the literal definition is just like writing it again. So I was thinking, well, the same thing Nick said, if I refactor it, I'm rewriting it technically,
Yes.
Technically true. But we were like, no, that's not what we mean by never. It's more like never do a full rewrite. And then that's not as catchy of a title. So we're just trying to find a way to say, don't do this particular thing that we've seen in the company that will ruin your career or your team or get you fired or just burn all your money in your startup, which is this, crazy idea of having two systems going, having to bug fix one, then you'll have to go change the second one that you're building because you had to patch it in the other system. You have to split your engineering resources to get both going. That kind of idea of a big full rewrite with a big bang cutover was his first. This is what our rewrite idea is that you should never do.
Yeah. I mean, listen, they're fraught with peril, and I think that they fail more often than they succeed, right? Because especially if you think of a traditional rewrite where you have some business software that is delivering value and generating revenue, and then you have this idea that I'm gonna somehow revolutionize the way we do things, that making the money seems to always be, prioritized ahead of technical purity or, paying down technical debt, I guess would be the most generous way of justifying such a thing. Right.
Yeah. Even that one's a hard sell. I've found is like the argument of we have tech debt does not move anyone, but other engineers who are like, yeah, we have to fix the tech debt. There's so much, and then the product people are like, for what reason? It's just
Yeah.
so hard to justify. So selling the rewrite requires a lot of extra bells and whistles. Oh, it's going to be a beautiful new era, and we can deliver features faster, and it'll make you even more money, and all these other kind of reasons to do it instead.
Yeah. Wow.
What can you describe any particular rewrites that you were on that failed in a very funny way that you would like to share with the audience, or even a rewrite as we've defined it that you think actually worked out somehow?
Yeah, I think, well, one true hallmark, I think for me, at least, yeah, is that rewrites tend to take a lot longer than you ever expected them to. Whether they succeed or fail seems like, and how you characterize that, you know, seems to largely depend on how much perseverance the team ultimately has in delivering it, or how much free, like, goodwill the organization has towards you actually going and finishing that work. And so, yeah, funny is not a word I would use to describe, I think, any any of the rewrites that I've been a part of.
Funny for us, not for you.
Grueling for sure.
It's in the retrospect, not definitely not funny at the time.
Yeah. I think a success case for us at System Initiative, we the company has been in development and heavy R&D for 5 years, and I'd say, right when I joined the company about 2 years ago, maybe 20 months ago, they were heavily in the midst of migrating to a new engine. And so, there's a core part of the product that was built on Postgres, with like stored procedures and triggers, and like that was clearly not going to scale to like very large scale infrastructure in the way that we were doing things. And so we needed to, like, rip out that piece of it in particular, and I guess you would say rewrite it. And that was something that I think, was slated to take a lot less time than it ultimately took, but ultimately kind of paid off in the end, because now you can build big graphs and manage it like large infrastructure, etc. And so, that's like a success case of it kind of working out. But I think the way that it was scoped and the way that we worked kind of helped with that. It wasn't like completely throw away the product and start from anew. It was like, take this very well encapsulated piece and evolve it in the context of kind of the broader vision of what we were trying to do.
Right. So it sounds like you replaced the persistence layer, which was Postgres, and more than Postgres, it was Postgres with the Postgres bells and whistles. You weren't just using Postgres as SQL; you were using it with the triggers and the way that.
Yeah. We basically used it like a graph database, and instead, what we did is we actually implemented a graph database.
And were you able to keep transition off Postgres like in an incremental manner as you got the data in?
Like, Postgres is still used, but it's just not used for that particular piece of the pie anymore. And so, yeah, we completely, for that, a core part of System Initiative is this idea of configuration propagation. So, like, if you have a configuration for, let's say, an exposed port on a Docker container,
mm-hmm.
and that drives the configuration of a load balancer inside of Amazon, as an example, being able to change a port over here will affect the configuration of your load balancer over there by building a relationship between those things. And so when I say trigger, what would happen is you would update this property here, and then a whole bunch of Postgres magic would happen, and the property over there would get changed. And now that is, completely done differently. It doesn't have like this Postgres subsystem involved in that in particular kind of use case. And so, yeah, that sped things up dramatically.
Interesting. From the description, I imagine you replaced the Postgres triggers with like an event bus of some kind.
We ended up writing. So System Initiative is based on what we call like a hypergraph of functions. It's basically like each property is set by and reactive to its own inputs. And so like it's actually a JavaScript function that would do a data transformation or data propagation. And so that whole eventing system is all run underneath by Nats. And so Nats kind of does the message propagation between the different parts of our component stack. And then, there was a Postgres side of this, the data access layer of that like kind of managed the that was a big part of this that kind of like kind of fell down as a part of doing these stored procedures and this propagation.
Yeah, I imagine that something like a database wouldn't be the best way to
exactly
have data ping-ponging around in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's an interesting one because a lot of the discussions we've had about around rewrites in general are generally like application logic or just how the code performs. We've had some discussions around front end versus back end rewrites. Not a lot of them, or like earlier about moving to microservices, but not a lot that are just about our data layer is not as performant as we'd like it to be, so we have to move to something that scales better for us, like the wrong, almost like the wrong language for the problem kind of thing. Where we're like, we've had this idea for a bit with rewrites succeeding in a sense if there is some other kind of forcing function. So we and they're delivered in a certain way in this kind of iterative fashion. So I think the Khan Academy one was like Google was deprecating Python 2.7 support or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to get off that version, right? And that forced them to, move forward. Whereas this constraint here is like a database constraint, it sounds like. So it's like there was something else forcing that rather than just like this, oh, it'd be great if we used this shiny new language, or it would be great if we had some other kind of, less good reason, so to speak.
Yeah. In our case, it was performance and scalability. Ultimately, like things started to slow down once your infrastructure got complicated enough, and the values couldn't propagate quickly enough. And so, the experience of changing this thing over here and waiting for it to propagate over there was just like way too long for it to be usable for people. And so, this was like an existential thing. You either had to fix it or, your technology wasn't going to work in the end. And so as a result, that like was prioritized. It, had a dedicated team working towards it. It aligned to the, corporate objectives because it was kind of existential. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, it was just like, I think that's why it worked though. Like, you come back to the beginning of like when these rewrites succeed, it's because, you can't deliver a feature without it. Or it's existential in some way to, the future of the product or the future of the business or, whatever that might be. And so,
I'm curious if we can keep digging on this a little bit.
Sure.
So it was all in Postgres, and then you needed to get it out of Postgres. And I think you said you wrote your own system for doing all the callbacks and the eventing.
Yeah.
Did that get released in a giant big bang? Like, in version 25, it was all Postgres. In 26, it was all the current thing, all the eventing thing, or did you have an incremental?
Yeah.
Cutover?
So I'm like, obviously very much butchering like the exact technical implementation because I didn't lead it and I wasn't part of it. So like, but in terms of how it was released, there was, let's say for a long time, there was a long-lived branch that lived alongside of the rest of the software. And what they would do is they would basically cherry pick daily, weekly, all of the commits that went in on main and rebase against that. And then ultimately there was a time where these things merged and lived in parallel. And then system initiative is largely feature flagged. We can release and unreleased features kind of at a whim. And so at some point we basically turned the feature flag on for internal people. We continued to test it out, and then ultimately rolled it out to our user base just by flipping a switch, basically.
Having daily, weekly, monthly cherry picks for a long-lived branch, that sounds brutal.
It was. Absolutely. Yeah. And the team was like, couldn't wait to get out of that mode, of having to do that, because it was brutal for everyone involved. Like, trying to keep track of, exactly when the right moment is to merge all of this in a way that's not going to like blow up the world, was a difficult call. I think, we probably thought we were ready maybe 3 or 4 weeks before the time that we were actually ready. And, but these things have a tendency to work themselves out when you try to do it and it fails, and you figure out why, and then you iterate, and, it ultimately happens.
Break fix is the great motivator. Not motivator.
Exactly. It's
that final push.
The great motivator was like, let's stop living in parallel worlds here, because it's clear that they need to converge. It's just a matter of like, how do we land that cleanly as opposed to landing it in a mess.
Yeah, the dual work of new features going into the legacy version and then having to be recreated for the new version is a common problem with rewrites. This is the first time I've heard of it. It's living in the same code base, so it's a branch with a cherry pick that doesn't.
Yeah.
It sounds like a different kind of hell than the normal hell. Like, you're not quite redoing it, but everything is a merge.
Yeah, and the way that we work, at System Initiative is like highly collaborative. We're on Zooms like this all of the time. And this team that was part of this rewrite, were basically isolated from the rest of the team. They had their project, they had their mission, and we were, all highly coordinated around it, but like they were really off kind of, on their own thing. And yeah, I think finding a way to get them back integrated into the flow of things, or making them feel like they weren't integrated into the flow of things, I think was another like cultural side of it that is like really daunting for people, and for organizations. It's like, can't bother them because they are off rebuilding this thing, or they're off rebuilding this thing so they can't, work on this feature that we need. Like that tension can be really difficult to manage, and not only from a business perspective, but also like from the people actually doing the work.
It does. It could be very isolating.
Exactly.
I think we had an earlier episode, Jeffrey, where we talked about something similar with that team split, like who gets to be on the rewrite versus who has to keep maintaining the old projects, the resource split in general. So if you're on like a bug heavy team, and suddenly now half the people that were helping you maintain that product are now working on the rewrite, and so you're left with dealing with all the bugs and just trying to keep the ship floating while they do the rewrite. That's still part of that, kind of like that team. Yeah, exactly. The team tension.
The Raji David get no respect.
Yeah. Do you tend to see that get like cut down in terms of like an A and B team, or how does that, in your experience, how is that kind of broken down in terms of who gets picked and who doesn't, I guess?
Yeah, so it's really destructive for what we've seen is you get the A team, which is going to do the rewrite, and then you get the B team or even the C team that gets stuck with keep the lights on maintenance. And so if you're on the C team, you get really depressed because, one, you've just been told very explicitly that you're not the rock stars and you don't get to do the cool stuff. And two, you're doing bug work that nobody wants you to be doing. That's just until the cool guys finish up, you're keeping the lights on. And so that's demoralizing. And then, like, you've also probably just lost half your team, so now you've got a higher workload and it's all bugs.
Yeah.
but and then you've got the A team who are like, oh, we're hot dog. We've been appointed, we've been anointed by leadership. They have gone out and said, bless you developers, go out and solve these hard problems, slay the dragon. And they're not going to most of the time. What will eventually happen, we found, is the dragon is going to eat them.
Mm.
And the team that'll be left will be the C team that you've now, implicitly or explicitly told were not as good as the dragon slaying team.
Yeah, that's tough. That's really tough. And like, there's actually a parallel there, I think, in my experience in like corporate open source, right? It's like, who's the team that gets to work on the open source versus like who has to work on the customer or the product stuff, like tends to devolve around those lines also. And you usually have the people, at least in the companies that I've worked at, that like were working on the product stuff. They like really wanted to be the open source maintainer or whatever. And so like that kind of, and the open source maintainer, since it drove a lot of the growth of the product and the brand and whatever, that kind of like was the prestigious place. And so, yeah, it tended to kind of devolve around these lines too. And managing morale in those environments was, ended up being pretty difficult. So, yeah.
Yeah, one thing, the second half of that we've found to be pretty prevalent is when the rewrite fails, most of the A team, the Dragon Slayers, are at leave. Yeah. Either they leave in disgust or they leave with their tails between their. They feel that they've been that leadership didn't give them enough time or enough resources, and so they leave because they're upset, or they leave feeling like they failed, or they get fired because leadership is just so upset with them.
Well, there's definitely a third one, which is you claim success and it's a resume building exercise and you go on to the next one, right? Like
yeah, I mean, that's one of the toxic things that we talk about in rewrites is everyone involved in the rewrite is probably going to leave the company, success or failure, because if it's a success, it's a big resume builder. If it's a failure, you probably get the shame or the problems are going to force them to leave.
Yeah.
And the leaders too, like the manager who approved this thing, for them it's either a resume builder or a career destroyer at that company.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Like, yeah, you see that a lot. Like when people, have this idea for a bold new ambition and, they're basically fate, lends itself in the balance. That could be from choosing a new technology to, incorporate. We saw that a lot, when we're selling Docker into large enterprises, as an example. You had a champion, and your success at that organization happens whether that champion was successful at getting the organization to adopt this technology or not. And it was great when it worked out, but more often than not, they didn't have as much political capital as they thought that they did. Or the organization didn't have as much will for change as they thought that they did, or, something like that. So it ends up not really working out as much as you'd hope, for sure. Even if like you go in with all of the good intentions. It's so interesting how there's a lot of parallels between like rewriting software and also adopting software or making bold change inside of an organization. There's like a lot of similar threads and themes to pull through there.
Yeah, especially adoption, because adoption is a changeover. Rewriting software is adopting a new software. It's just that you're adopting one that doesn't even exist yet.
So right, with all of the promise and all of the fallback that kind of comes along with that, right?
Right. It's betting the farm on the ultimate vaporware. Well, it's not the ultimate vaporware because it's
vapor until it materializes.
Awesome. Nick, can you, for people who want to learn more about you and System Initiative, how can they get in touch with you or learn more? Or tell us more.
Yeah, I'm like terrible at tweeting, but I think the most accessible place that I am is on Twitter at Nick Stinemates, and then also on Discord. I'm like, you can see there's like /Keeb or whatever on my name here. Like that's how you find me on Discord. That's probably the social media I spend most time on, to be honest. Yeah, and I work at System Initiative. System Initiative is a product built for engineers who need to get shit done, and so I kind of live in this world of like relentless pragmatism and less on the let's build an ivory tower for all of this shit to like magically work in the end, because that's clearly not happening in the infrastructure space. So yeah.
Cool. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Nick. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.